So the reading quiz will be on Tuesday. That'll just be on the end of Chapter 2. So that's sort of what was not included in the first quiz on Chapter 2. All right? And then pretty soon we're going to be having a quiz on Chapter 3. So I will go ahead and start reading that. Let's see. So we'll have a quiz on Tuesday. Let's just say we'll have a quiz the next Tuesday on Chapter 3. So that is, let me check my calendar. Let me go and write that down. That's the 18th, right. So let me go and put these in, actually, while I'm thinking of it. So that's quiz 2B, which is really our third quiz, right? And then we'll have our Chapter 3 quiz. Which is really our fourth quiz. Remember, I'm only counting 4 quizzes, so not 4, 5, right? I'm counting 5. So anything over 5 will drop your lowest. So that's good for y'all. All right. So hopefully we'll get 6 or 7 quizzes. I think we'll probably get 7. All right. The quizzes are good practice for you for the exam. So keep that in mind as you're doing the quizzes, but they don't count as much as the exam, so that's good too. A few more exams. If you didn't get yours, come get yours. And we're going to finish up Chapter 2 today, and then we'll start on Chapter 3 as well, hopefully. You have any questions or big news from the break? Any questions? All right, let me ask you all a question. So remember we had the Poiseuille equation? I always say equation like I'm French or something after I say Poiseuille. Because it's like I go into this thing. All right, so that equation described the Q, which was the flow rate. It was pi r to the 4th times delta P over 8 eta. What does eta describe? This Greek is the viscosity, so how viscous is it? So if something is more viscous, then it's going to have a lower flow rate, as you might expect, times the length of the tube. So let's say that we have a decrease by 10% in the radius of an artery. Which of these is going to, this will cause a change in P of what? The pressure. Is it A, 10, 8, 30, or 1%? Right, so I have this artery. I have a decrease by 10% in the radius because of some blockage within the artery. How does that affect the pressure? Does it change it by 10%, 8%, 30%, or 1%? This is sort of the overall blood pressure. I have a decrease of 10% in the radius. How does it change the pressure? Or by what amount does it change the pressure? 10, 8, 30, or 1%? All right, I'll stop at 55 seconds. 55. And I keep going. 55. Good to go. All right, here we go. C is right. And here we're not so much looking at the quantities, but looking at the changes. Because we know that a small change in the radius will cause a very large change in the pressure. Because I have this r to the 4th dependency upon the radius. And then, so if the radius goes down by 10%, that's going to cause the pressure to do what? Go up or down? What happens to the pressure? It goes up by 30%. So actually it's going to go up by 30%. But remember, as we talked about last time, this is sort of the pressure of the system, right? Which is like the blood pressure that you measure on your arm. But there's also a separate thing that goes on in the pressure actually locally. What happens locally where you have that blockage to the pressure? Does it go up or down? It goes down, right. And we talked about that. That was the Bernoulli equation. You're not responsible for that. But when you get that high velocity flow, you get a low pressure. And that can actually cause that artery to collapse down. If the blood flow gets too fast and the pressure gets too low, that the outer pressure of the body will just make it collapse down. Okay. Couple more things here. We're going to look at the lungs, the eye, and the brain, bladder, and the bones. All right. So let's look at the lungs. We've already talked about this a bit. How the lungs are a nice application of Boyle's law. And remember, Boyle's law just says that PV, that is the product of the pressure and the volume, is constant. And so when we inhale, it makes your chest cavity get bigger, and that causes the volume to go up. I had to try it out. What happens to your chest cavity? Yeah, your volume goes up, and then that causes the pressure inside to go down by Boyle's law. And if you have a low pressure inside your lungs, then that's going to cause the high pressure air to go into your lungs. Similarly, if you exhale, our volume goes down, and the pressure goes up, and the high pressure air inside your lungs rushes out into the atmosphere. Okay. Do you know what causes the lungs to contract and to relax? Makes them get bigger and smaller? Are they muscles? Are lungs muscles? No, lungs are not muscles. So lungs are not muscles. And so when they contract and get bigger, they rely upon the diaphragm. That's spelled right? I think it is. Yeah, they rely upon the diaphragm and the muscles in the chest. To cause the cavity to get bigger, and then the lungs just sort of fill that cavity. Or change volume, rather. All right, so you have this flat muscle below your lungs that will cause them to contract and relax, or to cause them to get bigger and smaller because of the shape of your chest cavity, and then also the muscles on the side of your chest will cause it to get bigger and smaller. Now, people that have diseases that cause them to lose muscle control, like, for example, what major disease hit the United States, the world? Huh? Okay, yeah, MS, but I was thinking polio in particular, that would cause them to lose muscle function, and so they'd have trouble breathing. Back then, they used something called the iron lung, and the iron lung, we'll watch a little video about it in just a second, but the iron lung was used to help people breathe. That is, people who had lost muscle control. And it did this by creating by changing the pressure. They put you inside this big container, and then they'd change the pressure. So a high pressure would cause the lungs to collapse and push air out of your mouth. And then when it would have a low pressure, it would cause them to open up, and then they would fill in with air. Let's watch this little video. It's kind of interesting. There are lots of ways to assist people in breathing, but this is a nice one. Say that we have this iron lung. You have, I'm going to draw it, something like this. You have a person that's inside of it. All right. What happens when you get a high pressure here? When you get a high pressure inside of the iron lung, do you A, exhale, or B, inhale? All right. So when you have a high pressure inside of the iron lung, do you A, exhale, or B, inhale? Oh, where's my clicker? Oh, there it is. You have high pressure inside the iron lung, so when that big diaphragm, when it pushes in and increases the pressure inside the iron lung, what happens? Do you exhale or inhale? Right, I'll stop at 30 seconds. Do you inhale or exhale when you have a high pressure inside the lung, the iron lung? I'm going to go at 35, 35. All right. Okay, that's right. The answer is A. You can think about this. Remember that little video that we watched of the water bottle when he took it down to great depths? What happened to the pressure at great depths? It crunched up because of the great pressure that was outside of it. Similar thing happens to your lungs. You get a larger pressure outside of your lungs, and it causes them to collapse partially, which causes you to exhale. So that's an application of Boyle's law. Let's look now at the eye. Let's see, there are several parts to the eye. There's a diagram, I think, in your book. I have one I'll show you in just a second. Several parts to the eye. We'll deal with the eye more in a later chapter. If we get to light and optics, which I think we will, then we'll deal with the human eye and how it deals with light. It's really interesting. But just sort of to survey the parts, we have the cornea. This is the outer surface of the eye. The aqueous humor. This is a liquid that is replenished. I'm just going to call it a replenished liquid. I'll show you where it is in just a moment. So this aqueous humor, it drains out of your eye, and then it's constantly replenished. And that can cause some problems with pressure that we'll talk about in just a second. So the aqueous humor is just this replenished liquid. You have the lens. This just allows you to focus light on the retina. As I said, we'll have a whole chapter just on this. Focus light on the retina. And then the vitreous humor. This is the bulk of the liquid that's inside the eye. It helps it to hold a spherical shape. Or at least a semi-spherical shape. You can have some problems with the eye if it's not actually a sphere. So we'll talk about that later. But if you have a longer eye or a shorter eyeball, like if it's squashed or if it's elongated, that causes near and farsightedness. The vitreous humor is actually, it's placed into your eye when you're in the embryo, and then it's not replenished. So not replenished, not draining, hopefully. And then finally, retina. So the retina is like the detector. it detects the light signal and sends it to your brain. It's a fascinating thing, actually, which we'll spend time later on. Detects light and sends a signal to the brain. Right. In particular, we're going to be dealing with this aqueous humor. We'll look at it and the pressure of the eye because it helps uh, to govern the pressure in the eye. There are some. Actually, let me show you a picture first. Y'all studied the eye at all in any of your classes? You have? Gosh, y'all study everything about the human body. Is that true? Basically, in anatomy. Oh, okay. I've never had a biology course. Like when I was in high school, I took the ecology course, which was sort of, I don't know, it was sort of like biology for football players. I wasn't a football player, but it was. Not that football players are really sharp. I have some really sharp football players, but you know what I mean. Let's see. Here we go. So here you can see all the various parts. As I said, we'll talk about this more later, but this is the aqueous humor. This is the part that is replenished, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right about that? Yeah, that's the part that's replenished. And so you get drainage out of this, and then it's also continually replenished. This is the cornea, protects the eye. This is the lens, which allows you to focus light, and onto the retina back here. So the retina is basically right around here. There's a picture in your book as well, I believe. Is that true? Is there a picture in your book of the eye? I think there is. All right, but it shows these parts. Okay, let's talk a little bit about pressure. The intraocular pressure. This is just the pressure in the eye. And you can have some problems that come up if you have too much or too little pressure. God bless you. If you have high pressure, this is usually caused by the drainage becoming blocked, the drainage of the aqueous humor being blocked. Let me write that. Usually, so you can either have too little drainage, or what's the other scenario where you could get this pressure to be too high? If it's not draining, you're going to get an increase in pressure, or what? Right, if you're producing too much. So either you don't have enough coming out, or you have too much coming in. So you can either have the aqueous humor drainage blocked, or produce too much of this. High pressure. This is called glaucoma. You might have heard of or know somebody that deals with this. You can also have low pressure, which can occur with either the drainage being too much and not producing enough of this aqueous humor, or by some other traumatic event, like, I don't know, a pencil stuck in your eye or whatever. So with the low pressure, you can get collapse of the eyeball, which is obviously very bad. All right. So the intraocular pressure is just the pressure in the eye, and then you can have these two different things. You can either have high pressure or low pressure. High pressure is called glaucoma. High pressure can be caused either by not enough drainage or too much production of the aqueous humor, or you can have low pressure, which would cause collapse of the eyeball, kind of like the collapse of that artery. Remember when you got low pressure there? They measure this. This pressure is very interesting. I don't know if y'all have seen this before. With a tonometer. So I'm going to call that intraocular pressure IP is measured with a tonometer. I've never actually had this done on me. Has anybody ever had the pressure of their eyeball checked? Yeah. Is it painful? It's uncomfortable. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I've seen this. I've seen several things on the internet, but there are different kind of tonometers, and some of them just sort of blow a little bit of air, and I guess they measure the pressure of the air coming back. But I found another one actually that I thought was interesting. It's actually a little thing that comes out and touches your eyeball very gently, and it's trying to figure out how much pressure is going to take to push in on the eyeball, and then that will give you a measure of what is the pressure in the eyeball, right? I mean, you sort of know this, right? Like if you're airing up your air mattress, like I was doing this weekend, because my mother-in-law's in town for my son to sleep on, and if you add more air, then it gets firmer, right? And so you know the pressure inside it is greater. So a tonometer is basically just pushing your finger on your eye to see how firm it is. But this is I have a little clip here of a tonometer that's being used on a beagle. Pause this. So this tonometer is is used to measure the pressure. And it measures the force required to bend the cornea. The tonometer measures the force required to bend the cornea. It actually pushes on your cornea just a bit, whether with the little plastic thing or with a rush of air. All right. Okay. I go down from here, folks. Just a few more topics, and then we're going to move on to the next chapter. The next little section, as I said, the author, he just sort of goes through and talks about each of these and applications of pressure and fluids in each. The next is on the brain. The brain and also sort of the central nervous system. The brain is protected by a number of different things. Of course, first it's protected by the skull. And the skull consists of cranial bones. And the cranial bones actually cover up the brain. And then also the facial bones, which give shape to our face. Then there are the meninges. Am I saying that correctly? What is it? Meninges. That's not how it is. Meninges. These are membranes that cover the brain. There are actually 3 of them. And then there's something called CSF. These meninges, these contain CSF. CSF is, you'll probably know this, but it's cerebrospinal fluid. Yeah, cerebral spinal fluid. Typically, you have about 3/4 of a cup, I read. 3/4 of a cup of this cerebral spinal fluid in your head. And that helps to cushion the brain. It also helps to regulate the blood flow to the brain. About 3/4 of a cup. This is, you have production, both production of the CSF and then also drainage of the CSF, kind of like what we had with the aqueous humor. And so you can imagine that you can have problems where you either have too little pressure or too much pressure for that. Let me get another page here. Sorry guys, give me just a moment here. Run out of white space. There we go. So you can have problems with too much or little pressure. In the CSF. And remember, we have two things, both the production and the drainage. So you can either be producing too much, or you can not be draining well enough, or both. Both of those combine to regulate the pressure of the CSF. So we have a couple different things. This is, you can have an abnormal accumulation of CSF, so you can have too much. And this is called hydrocephalus. So this is too much. You can also have too little. What's a major problem that you could have if you didn't have enough CSF in your head? Huh? Yeah, so it would actually touch the side of your skull. Is that what happens in a concussion? Okay. Okay, so that's a little more than I need to know. But no, I appreciate that. Does it really comes out the ear? Has any ever happened to anybody? No, but y'all seen it before? No? Okay. So lack of CSF can also cause problems. The brain can actually bump up against the skull. I have a little video I want to show you. Right, just a simulation of this happening. And apparently this is really painful. This has never happened to me, but it seems like it should be painful, right? All right, can I take this away for just a moment? I just have a little short video. It's just a simulation or an animation of this occurring. Sorry. Sorry about that if y'all use it. We went to Hattiesburg this weekend. Did I tell y'all we're going to Hattiesburg? I didn't tell you? Yeah, we went to Hattiesburg, and we rented a cabin up there. My dad came up. We just sort of hung out. Oh, let's see. These are just a few more questions. Is it possible to do work on an object that remains at rest? Yes or no? All right, I'll stop at 30 seconds. Stopping at 30. Okay, well, I'll remind you of the definition of work. The definition of work is force times displacement. So why don't we try that again? Is it possible to do work on an object that remains at rest? Remember the definition of work, which is force times displacement. All right, I'll stop at 25. 25. Okay, very good. So if it's at rest, that means it's not moving, and so there's no work being done. A box is being pulled across a rough floor at a constant speed. What can you say about the work done by friction? Does friction do no work at all? Does friction do negative work? Or does friction do positive work? Looking particularly at the work done by friction. Stop at 25. 25. I'll post these online, by the way. Okay, friction does negative work. That's correct. Because the frictional force is opposite the direction of the displacement. So if my displacement is in this direction, my frictional force, which is a kinetic frictional force, is in that direction. What is the net work on this object? Okay, we're not looking at friction, but what is the total work? Do you have no work at all, negative work, or positive work being done on this object? You have no work, positive work, or no negative or positive. This is the total work that's being done on the object. I'll stop at 35 seconds. 35 seconds. Remind you of the definition of work. The work is equal to the force times the displacement. But I can think about when I'm talking about the total work, I'm not just talking about any force, I'm talking about the net force. All right? So if I'm talking about the net force, what is going to be the total work being done on this object? So the question, what is the net force on this object? This box being pulled across a rough floor at a constant speed. And I'll stop at 25. What is the net force on this object? No, let me redraw this. So I have another force pulling in this direction, right? It's moving with what acceleration? What's the acceleration equal to? Is 0. It has 0 acceleration. Are we done? We're at. I was thinking we get out at 11. We get out at 10:20, don't we? Is that right? What time do we get out of this class? Okay, let me finish this question. So it is no work because your net force is equal to 0. No work. All right, guys, y'all have a great day, okay? Gosh, I would have kept y'all here till 11 o'clock. Bye, Cheyenne.